in the cradle of civilization, where the Euphrates whispered to the sands, there rose a king unlike any other, Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine, 1/3 man. His name was carved into the stone walls of Uruk, the city of splendor and strength, whose walls touched the sky and temples honored gods long forgotten. But Gilgamesh was not remembered for peace. He ruled with the fury of a lion, mighty in battle, cruel in his hunger for power. No man could challenge him, no woman deny him. The people of Uruk cried out to the heavens, begging the gods to temper their king. And so the gods listened, not with thunder or plague, but with a mirror of flesh and spirit, a wild man born of clay and wilderness. His name would be Enkidu, and he would change the course of kings. Yet, in this moment, Gilgamesh stood alone, untouched, unmatched, a king weighed down by his own immortality of name, unaware that his truest journey had yet to begin. He who saw the deep, the tablets would later say, but first he would see himself. Far from the grandeur of Uruk, beyond the reach of city walls, the gods shaped an answer, not of kings, but of nature. Enkidu, born of the earth, roamed the open plains with gazelles, his limbs strong like cedar, and his mind untouched by the burdens of men. He drank from the rivers, ate with the beasts, and lived in harmony with the wild. He was pure, unspoiled by civilization. Yet, even in the wilderness, destiny stirred. The trappers who glimpsed him trembled, thinking him a spirit. They sought help, and the wise were summoned. A woman was chosen, not a warrior, but the priestess of Ishtar, a harlot of holy purpose. For it was known in ancient wisdom that intimacy tames the beast and awakens the soul. And so she came, with eyes like embers and voice like water, and for 6 days and 7 nights she showed Enkidu the world of men. When it was done, the gazelles fled him. The beasts no longer knew his scent. Enkidu had changed. No longer wild, no longer beast, he had become a man. And in the fire of his awakening, he would hear whispers of a king, a man as mighty as he, a fate yet unwritten. The winds shifted over Uruk as Enkidu entered the city, barefoot, fierce, eyes burning with wonder and defiance. The people whispered of the wild man who walked like a god, whose strength could rival even Gilgamesh. And when king and wild man finally stood face to face, the heavens held their breath. Gilgamesh saw in Enkidu not a threat, but a reflection, raw, untamed, and unafraid. Their clash was thunder. Stone cracked, dust rose like storm clouds. The streets of Uruk shook as they fought, not for land, not for gold, but for the right to define destiny. But no victor rose from the dust. Instead, in the fire of conflict, they found something deeper: respect. Two halves of a whole, warrior and wild, king and kindred. From that moment, they were no longer alone. A bond was forged that would defy even the gods. Brotherhood, unspoken but unbreakable. And together, they would carve their names into eternity. With hearts bound by battle and friendship, Gilgamesh and Enkidu sought a challenge worthy of legends. Beyond Uruk lay the cedar forest, sacred ground guarded by the monstrous servant of Enlil, Humbaba, the demon of ruined breath and sevenfold terror. None had dared tread this realm, but Gilgamesh craved glory, and Enkidu, though troubled by omens, would not leave his brother's side, The journey began beneath an angry sun, through barren deserts and shadowed valleys. Each night they dreamt, visions sent by the gods, and Enkidu, once wild and free, now wrestled with fear. Still they pressed forward, two against fate. When at last they reached the forest's edge, the scent of cedar turned sweet to bitter. Trees stretched like giants into the heavens, and the wind whispered Baba's name. Enkidu's hands trembled with fear. Gilgamesh placed his on his shoulder. We are together, that is enough. And so, blades drawn, hearts racing, they stepped into the realm of the beasts. Within the cedar forests, the air turned heavy. The wind stilled, the birds fell silent, and then Mbaba came, a force of terror shaped in flesh. His face changed with the wind, his voice was thunder, and his breath scorched the trees. Even the bravest would have fled, but Gilgamesh stood firm, and Enkidu, despite the dread curling in his soul, stood with him. Steel clashed with fury. The earth shook as they battled the guardian of the gods. The sky wept, the forest groaned, and at last, Humbaba fell. But the victory was not pure. For Humbaba begged, he wept, he offered servitude. Yet Gilgamesh, urged by Enkidu, struck him down. The gods were not pleased. In the silence that followed, a shadow passed over the sun. Storms gathered in the heavens. The gods, watching from above, spoke among themselves. Who are these mortals to defy our will, to slay what was sacred? And so they turned their gaze to Enkidu, not the king, but the wild man. The heart of this rebellion. A sentence was passed, not by sword, but by sickness. The days that followed were drenched in sorrow. Enkidu, once wild and full of life, now withered beneath the gaze of the gods. His laughter faded, his strength drained, and the light in his eyes dimmed like a dying star. Gilgamesh sat by his side, helpless, broken. The king who once feared nothing now feared the silence that loomed. Enkidu wept, not for death, but for the shame of being punished by the gods, for defying the divine, for slaying Mbaba, for touching the heavens with mortal hands. And as fear gripped him, he cried out, "Why must I die? I who ran with gazelles, who drank with lions, who stood beside a king, am I nothing more than dust?" Gilgamesh grasped his hand. "Brother, your name will not fade. The world will remember. I will remember." And then stillness. The wild man was no more. The king tore his garments, covered his head with dust, and the mighty walls of Uruk echoed with his cries. For the first time, Gilgamesh understood death, not as a tale, but as truth, and it pierced him deeper than any blade. Grief became a fire in Gilgamesh's soul. He had conquered kingdoms, he had battled beasts, he had defied the gods, but none of it mattered now. For in Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh saw his own fate, and he was afraid. He could not accept it, that even kings turned to dust, that even gods let mortals slip into shadow. And so he cast off his crown, he left the gates of Uruk behind. Driven by despair, he wandered the ends of the earth, through serene deserts and frozen mountains, through lands where the scorpion men guard the horizon. Gilgamesh searched for the one who escaped death. Utnapishtim, the immortal, the one who survived the great flood. He battled sleep, he challenged time, he defied the silence between life and eternity. Each step forward was a scream against fate. He was no longer a king. He was a man chasing a whisper. and in his eyes burned only one question: must I die too? At the edge of the world where sunlight dies into eternal twilight, Gilgamesh crossed the waters of death. There he found Utnapishtim, the man the gods had spared, the keeper of the flood's forgotten truth. Gilgamesh fell to his knees. Tell me, how did you escape death? How can I? Utnapishtim gazed upon him, not as a king, but as a soul unraveling. And then he spoke. There is no permanence. The gods gave death to man and life to the gods. That is the way. He told him of the flood, of a world washed clean, of a gift once granted, never again. And yet, he offered Gilgamesh a chance, a test. Stay awake for 7 days. Defy sleep as you seek to defy death. But even the mighty fall. Gilgamesh slept, and when he woke, he wept. Even in my quest for eternity, I could not conquer sleep. Still, Utnapishtim, moved by compassion, revealed his secret. A plant that grows beneath the sea, one that restores youth. Gilgamesh dove into the depths. He grasped the torn stem with bleeding hands. Hope surged through his heart. But as he rested on his journey home, a serpent came. It stole the plant, it vanished into the wild, and with it, his last hope. Gilgamesh returned back to Uruk, empty-handed, but changed. He looked upon the walls he had built, the city he ruled, the people he once overlooked, and he understood. This is immortality, not in flesh, but in legacy. Thus ends the tale of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, slayer of beasts, seeker of eternity. He did not find what he sought, but he found what he needed. Not immortality of the flesh, but of memory, of stone, of story. He returned not as a god, but as a man who had walked through grief and emerged with wisdom. Look upon my works, O you who live. For as long as men build, dream and wonder, his name will endure. And in every soul that questions fate, in every heart that mourns a friend, Gilgamesh lives on. Not in the halls of the gods, but in whispers of time, in the echoes of antiquity.